It was Monday evening in Denver, Colorado, and the clock on the wall was ticking toward 8:30 p.m. I'd spent the day finishing up a project for a new client at my home office. The work was still ongoing, but I was done for the night. I grabbed a bottle of my favorite IPA from the fridge and walked into the kitchen. The dim light from outside illuminated the pool area, and I saw my sister, Hannah, curled up on the outdoor couch by the fire pit. She was chatting on her phone, her feet tucked beneath her, and there was something about her body language that immediately caught my attention. As I was about to head outside and join her, I noticed something unusual. Hannah was twirling a strand of her brunette hair with her fingers, something I hadn't seen her do in years. I froze for a moment. It was a habit she'd had when we were younger, an unconscious gesture that always seemed to appear during our most private, intimate conversations. It wasn't just a nervous tic, it was how she'd show me she was emotionally present, her way of connecting. I knew this better than anyone, especially after the many late-night talks we'd had. Hannah had always been more reserved about her feelings, but when she twirled her hair, it was like I could read her thoughts. Tonight, however, something felt different. My gaze stayed fixed on her as she continued to chat on the phone. Her smile, her laughter, they weren't for me. It felt like there was a distance growing between us, something that hadn't been there before. I squinted, trying to make sense of what was happening. The way she smiled now, so freely, so completely, was it directed at the person on the other end of the phone? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just a casual conversation. I couldn't see the gleam in her eyes from where I stood, but I knew it well. It was the same look I'd seen years ago, when we were teenagers. The same twinkle I'd always associated with our closest moments until now. I swallowed hard. There it was, Hannah was flirting. I stood motionless for a long time, watching her talk, trying to piece things together. The realization hit me like a punch in the chest. My sister, the one person who'd always been my rock, was hiding something from me. I watched for what felt like an eternity as Hannah laughed, her voice light and carefree. She was completely at ease, her body relaxed, and yet something about the way she was interacting made my stomach twist. There was a sense of warmth in her expression, but it wasn't the warmth I was used to. The smile she had on her face was more radiant than I'd seen in years, and it stung. It was a smile I hadn't received in a long time, one that seemed to be meant for someone else. I tried to shake off the uncomfortable feeling, but it lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Hannah had always been the one to hold our family together. We'd been through a lot together, from losing our parents when we were young to navigating adulthood side by side. But now, I felt like I was losing her in a way I couldn't explain. When the phone call finally ended, Hannah sat back, staring at the sky, a soft smile playing at the edges of her lips. I knew that smile. I'd seen it before, but never like this. It was different, more carefree, like she was basking in a moment of joy that didn't include me. I hesitated before walking into the living room. I couldn't pretend everything was normal anymore. I tried to focus on the television, but the image on the screen blurred as I replayed the conversation in my head. I didn't know who she was talking to, but whoever it was clearly had her attention in a way I wasn't used to. After a while, Hannah came inside, her cheeks flushed from the cool night air. Her presence filled the room, and I felt a wave of bitterness wash over me. "How was the call?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral, though it was hard to mask the unease that had settled deep in my chest. "Oh, it was nothing," she replied, brushing a stray hair from her face. "Just talking to Ben about some work stuff. You know how it is." I nodded, but something about the way she said his name made my stomach churn. Ben was a colleague of hers, someone I'd met a few times, but I hadn't thought much of him. Now, though, the mention of his name seemed to carry more weight than it ever had before. "Really?" I asked, forcing myself to sound casual. "You didn't sound like it was just work." She looked at me curiously but didn't press the issue. "I don't know what you mean," she said lightly, moving to the kitchen and coming back with a glass of wine. She settled onto the couch, sitting closer to me than usual. I could feel the tension between us growing. She was being so open, so relaxed, and it wasn't just because of the wine. It felt like she was testing the waters, trying to see how far she could go before I would react. I didn't answer her right away. My mind was still racing, the words she'd said to Ben echoing in my head. I wanted to believe her, but a part of me couldn't ignore the way she'd smiled during the call. It wasn't the smile of someone talking about work, it was the smile of someone in the early stages of something else. "Do you want to have dinner with me this weekend?" she asked, trying to break the silence that had grown thicker between us. I was thinking of inviting a few friends over. It could be fun. Her tone was light, but I could hear the underlying urgency in her voice. She wanted to keep things normal, to keep me from digging deeper. "Sounds good," I replied, my voice distant. I wasn't sure if I could stomach spending the weekend pretending everything was fine. But I had no choice. She was my sister, and I wasn't ready to confront her yet. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of small talk and forced smiles. I barely heard a word she said as I replayed the scene outside over and over again in my head. I couldn't shake the image of her sitting there by the fire pit, twirling her hair, smiling at someone who wasn't me. That night, after we finished watching the movie, I retreated to my room, pretending to fall asleep. But I couldn't. My mind was too busy piecing together the puzzle I was now caught in. I knew I had to find out the truth, no matter how painful it was. The next day, I did what I'd never thought I'd do. I began to track her. It started with small things, checking her phone when she wasn't looking at her text messages. I told myself it was for peace of mind, that I was just worried about her. But deep down, I knew I was searching for something I didn't want to find. Days passed, and the tension between Hannah and I grew. I continued to keep tabs on her, mostly through subtle observations. I noticed she was spending more time on her phone, often smiling at messages I couldn't see. She'd even started going on longer walks by herself, claiming she just needed some fresh air, but something about it felt off. One evening, I was out of town for work, and I decided to dig a little deeper. I checked her phone again when I returned home. This time, I found something that made my heart stop, a message from Ben, and the text was unmistakably flirtatious. "I can't stop thinking about last night. I'm counting down the days until I can see you again." I felt my stomach lurch. My instincts had been right. Hannah was not just spending time with Ben for work. Something had been building between them, and I had been blind to it. I had to face it now, and the truth was bitterer than I could have imagined. I knew I had to confront her. But how? I couldn't just come out and accuse her of cheating. She was my sister, after all, and I wasn't sure if I could even survive the truth. The next day, I returned home earlier than expected from my business trip, hoping to catch her off guard. I knew she had a meeting with a client, and I waited for her to leave the house, pacing back and forth in the living room. It felt like everything had come to a standstill. This wasn't just about a betrayal of trust, it was about everything I had once believed in. As I sat there, the door opened, and I heard Hannah's voice. She sounded different. Her tone was softer than usual, almost like she was trying to hide something. I could tell she was nervous. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, walking into the room. She wasn't expecting me to be home, and I could see the surprise in her eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But you know, I've been thinking." She raised an eyebrow, sensing something was wrong. "About what?" "About us," I began, my voice faltering slightly. "About everything." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt cross her face, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "I don't know how to say this, but I think you've been keeping something from me, Hannah. I found the messages. From Ben." Hannah's face went pale. She stepped back as if she had been struck. The air between us crackled with tension. What messages?" she asked, her voice shaky. I didn't hesitate. "The ones where you two are talking about seeing each other again. The ones that aren't just about work." She swallowed hard, trying to maintain her composure. But it was clear that I had caught her. She stared at me for a long moment, as if searching for the right words. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry," she said, her eyes filled with regret. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could keep this separate, that it wouldn't change anything between us." The words stung. I had always believed my sister was the one person I could trust with everything. And now, that trust had been shattered. How long has this been going on, Hannah? I asked, my voice shaking with emotion. About 6 months, she admitted, her eyes downcast. It started with just a few casual conversations. But it became more than that. I felt my heart drop as the truth settled in. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My sister, the person I had always looked to for support and stability, had been living a double life behind my back. She had been hiding something from me, something so significant that it tore apart the foundation of everything we had built. Why didn't you tell me? Why keep it a secret? I asked, my voice cracking. I didn't know how, she said quietly, her tears starting to fall. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want you to think less of me. I stood there, staring at her, unsure of what to say next. I had never imagined that this would happen to us. I had thought that no matter what, we would always have each other. But now, that bond felt fractured, irreparably broken. The silence between us was deafening. Hannah wiped her tears, trying to gather herself, but I could see the weight of her guilt in her eyes. I wanted to feel angry, to shout at her, to tell her how much she'd hurt me. But all I could feel was a hollow ache in my chest. The betrayal wasn't just that she'd been hiding something from me, it was that she had turned to someone else for comfort and connection, someone who wasn't me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing thoughts. What now? I asked, the question barely escaping my lips. Hannah hesitated, unsure of what to say. I don't know, she finally admitted. I never wanted this. But now that it's out in the open, I'm not sure what to do either. The weight of her words hung in the air. She had hurt me, yes, but now she was the one who was hurting too. I didn't know how to help her, or if I should. Part of me wanted to walk away, to cut ties and never look back. But the other part of me, the part that still loved her, was struggling to understand how we got here. Could we fix this? Do you love him? I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I didn't know if I wanted the answer, but I needed to hear it. She nodded, her voice barely audible. I think I do, she said, her eyes filled with pain. But I don't know what that means anymore. Everything's so complicated. I nodded slowly, processing her words. I couldn't deny the truth of it. We were both lost in this mess, tangled in emotions that we didn't know how to untangle. There was so much love between us, but right now, it felt like that love had turned into something toxic. You should go to him, I said quietly, surprising both of us with the calmness in my voice. If you love him, you should figure this out. But you need to understand, Hannah, I'm not the person I was before. You've changed everything. Her eyes filled with more tears as she reached out, but I pulled back, not ready to be comforted. I wasn't sure if I could ever go back to being the sister she once knew. The person she'd betrayed wasn't someone she could easily come back to. I'll be okay, I said softly, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. I need time to figure this out. You need to figure things out too. But I can't pretend like nothing happened. Not now. She nodded, wiping her tears away and stepping back. I'm sorry. I truly am. And with that, she left the room. I sat there for what felt like hours, alone with my thoughts. The house felt empty in a way it never had before. My heart felt torn, half of me wanted to run after her, to beg her to fix everything, but the other half knew I needed distance to heal. Later that night, after Hannah had gone to stay at Ben's, I stood at the window, staring out into the darkened yard. The lights of the city in the distance flickered, casting shadows over the landscape. Everything had changed so quickly, so completely. What had once been my safe place, my home, now felt like a battlefield, a place of lost trust and fractured bonds. I didn't know where things would go from here, or if they could ever go back to the way they were. But I did know this, I wasn't the same person anymore. And neither was she. I had to move forward. Even if that meant leaving her behind.